Breaking news that's come in where the Pentagon has apparently summoned the military officials from around the world for a gathering in Virginia. And according to Washington Post, even the top generals and their staff at this moment apparently don't know the reason for this meeting. Now, according to reports, the highly unusual directive was sent to virtually all of the military's top commanders worldwide. Government shutdown looms, and the Trump administration had earlier announced plans to undertake a sweeping consolidation of top military commands. There are about 800 generals and admirals spread across the United States and dozens of other countries and time zones. The unprecedented order applies to all senior officers with the rank of the brigadier general serving in command positions and their top enlisted advisors. Now, typically, these officers each oversee hundreds or thousands of rank-and-file troops. All right, now joining us on the broadcast, we've got our correspondent Susan Tehrani. Susan, what are we to make of this latest development that's been put out there?
Okay, so NATO just called an emergency meeting. Like, not a regular meeting, but an emergency meeting. And yeah, you need to hear why this is happening right now, because what's going down in Brussels is absolutely wild. Here's the thing. President Trump just threatened to kick Spain out of NATO. Yeah, you heard that right. Spain, a country that's been part of the alliance for decades. And European leaders, they're losing it. Spanish officials hit back hard on October 9th, basically saying, "Are you kidding me? We've been committed to this alliance forever." But that's not even the craziest part. Russian drones are now flying into Poland and Romania. MiG jets are circling over Estonia. And while all this is happening, while Russia is literally testing NATO's borders, Trump is out here talking about expelling member countries and questioning whether we should even defend our allies. Can you believe this? But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. NATO defense ministers are gathering in Brussels on October 15th to deal with this mess. And look, this isn't just some routine check-in. European diplomats, and I'm talking about people in closed-door sessions, are calling Trump's approach a security threat, not Russia's aggression. Trump's approach, let that sink in. So what's really going on here? Why is the most powerful military alliance in human history suddenly holding emergency meetings about the American president? And why are our closest allies more worried about us than they are about Russian jets buzzing their airspace? Here's what nobody's telling you. This isn't just about NATO. This is about whether America can be trusted anymore. It's about whether our word means anything. And it's about what happens when the leader of the free world starts acting like he doesn't want the job. Trump's been threatening NATO for years, right? We all know this. He's called it obsolete. He's complained about defense spending. He suggested maybe we shouldn't automatically defend countries that don't pay enough. But this is different, because now he's actually doing something about it. He's naming countries. He's threatening expulsion. And he's doing it while Russian military activity is ramping up in ways we haven't seen in years.
So I have some bullet points here that I want to read for you, Mohammed. Sources say that they cannot recall a defense secretary calling so many flag officers together at once. Concerns raised about security risks of pulling generals from global command zones simultaneously.
Poland had Russian drones enter their territory in late September. Romania too. Estonia's watching Russian fighter jets linger in their airspace, and they're running counter drills like crazy because they're genuinely worried about what comes next. And where's America in all this? Where's the reassurance? Where's the "we've got your back" that NATO was literally built on? Instead, we've got Trump saying Spain should maybe get kicked out for free riding. Like, come on. Spain's been a solid NATO member. They've contributed. They've participated. But because Trump's decided they're not doing enough, now they're on the chopping block. This is wild. And here's the thing that should terrify everyone. Russia is watching this. Putin is watching Trump tear into our allies, question our commitments, and basically broadcast to the world that NATO might not have America's full support anymore. You think that's not going to embolden Moscow? You think they're not going to test those boundaries even more? European confidence in U.S. support is tanking. Polls show it, diplomatic cables show it, and now we've got NATO holding an emergency meeting because they genuinely don't know if they can count on us anymore. That's where we are. That's the reality. But wait, there's more. Because while Trump's threatening to expel NATO allies, he just made a unilateral promise to defend Qatar. Yeah, Qatar, a non-NATO country. He bypassed Congress, didn't consult with anyone, just said, yeah, we'll defend you. And both Democrats and Republicans are freaking out because what is the strategy here? We're questioning our commitment to actual treaty allies while making up new defense commitments on the fly. So let me break down what's really at stake here. NATO has been the backbone of Western security since 1949. It's kept the peace in Europe. It's deterred Russian aggression. It's been the single most successful military alliance in history. And right now, it's more vulnerable than it's been in decades, not because of external threats, but because of internal chaos driven by the American president. This emergency meeting is not just about Russian drones or airspace violations. It's about whether NATO can survive a U.S. president who seems more interested in blowing it up than defending it. And what happens next could reshape global security for generations. All right, so let's get into what's actually happening here, because the surface level story doesn't even scratch how deep this goes. First off, understand this. NATO isn't just some club, it's a treaty. Article 5 of the NATO treaty says an attack on one member is an attack on all. That's only been invoked once, after 9/11s. And guess who invoked it? Our allies. For us, European countries sent troops to Afghanistan because America was attacked. They honored the treaty. They showed up. And now Trump's out here acting like that commitment is negotiable. Like it's some kind of business deal where if you don't pay enough, you don't get the service. That's not how treaties work. That's not how alliances work. But that's how Trump sees it. October 9th. Trump suggests Spain should be expelled for free riding. Spanish officials immediately pushed back, reaffirming their commitment to NATO and pointing out everything they've contributed over the years. But the damage was done, because it's not just Spain wondering if they're next. It's every smaller NATO member looking at this and thinking, if he'll go after Spain, what about us? Poland's got to be terrified right now. They've been one of the most vocal supporters of strong NATO presence in Eastern Europe. They've asked for more U.S. troops. They've spent money on defense, and they're literally dealing with Russian drones entering their airspace. And Trump's response is to threaten other NATO members instead of focusing on the actual threat. Romania's in the same boat. Late September, early October, Russian drones just flying into their territory. These aren't accidents. These are deliberate provocations. Russia is testing how NATO responds. They're seeing if the alliance still has teeth. And what they're finding is an alliance in chaos because the U.S. president won't stop attacking his own allies. Estonia's situation is even scarier. MiG-31 fighter jets, these are serious aircraft, lingering in Estonian airspace. Estonia is running major counter drills because they're genuinely worried Russia might try something. And remember, Estonia is tiny. They're on Russia's border. They rely on NATO, specifically on the U.S., for security guarantees. If they think those guarantees are shaky, that's a crisis. Now let's talk about what's happening behind closed doors, because this is where it gets really interesting. European diplomats, people who usually keep things diplomatic and measured, are calling Trump's approach a security threat in closed sessions. Not publicly, not in press conferences, in private meetings where they're speaking candidly. They're more worried about Trump than they are about Putin. Think about that. Why? Because Putin's predictable. He's aggressive, sure, but you know what he wants. He wants to rebuild Russian influence. He wants to weaken NATO. He wants to divide the West. That's all clear. But Trump? Nobody knows what Trump wants. One day he's threatening allies. The next day he's making unilateral defense commitments to countries that aren't even in NATO. There's no strategy. There's no consistency. And that unpredictability is terrifying to countries whose survival depends on American support. Here's what most people don't understand about NATO. It's not just a military alliance. It's a credibility alliance. The whole thing works because everyone believes Article 5 is real. If Poland gets attacked, America will respond. If Estonia gets invaded, American troops will fight. That belief, that credibility, is what keeps Russia from trying anything. Because Putin knows that attacking a NATO country means war with the United States. But what happens when that credibility erodes? What happens when Poland looks at Trump's rhetoric and thinks maybe America won't actually show up? That's when the deterrent fails. That's when Russia starts calculating whether they can get away with more aggressive moves. And that's exactly what's happening right now. The emergency meeting on October 15th isn't just about Russian drones. It's about how NATO responds to a situation where the alliance's most powerful member is actively undermining it. Defense ministers are gathering to figure out, basically, how do we maintain deterrence when our biggest partner is the source of instability? And let's connect this to Trump's history, because this didn't come out of nowhere. Trump's been skeptical of NATO since before he took office. He's called it obsolete. He's complained about burden sharing. During his first term, he reportedly wanted to withdraw from NATO entirely. His own advisors had to talk him down, so this isn't new. But what is new is that he's now in his second term, and there's nobody left to restrain him. First-term Trump had adults in the room. People like Mattis, Kelly, McMaster. They pushed back on his worst instincts. Second-term Trump, he's surrounded by loyalists, people who won't tell him no, and that means his impulses, his instinct to blow things up, to challenge the status quo, to treat alliances like business transactions. Those impulses have free reign now. Here's where it gets even messier. While Trump's questioning our commitment to NATO allies, He just promised to defend Qatar unilaterally, without consulting Congress, without going through any normal process. He just said it. And Qatar isn't in NATO. They're not a treaty ally. There's no Article 5 equivalent, but Trump made the commitment anyway. Both Democrats and Republicans are alarmed by this, and yeah, that's rare. When you get bipartisan concern in this political environment, you know something's seriously wrong. Because the question everyone's asking is, what's the logic here? We're threatening to abandon countries we have actual treaties with, while making up new commitments to countries we don't. It doesn't make sense from a strategic perspective. It doesn't make sense from a legal perspective. And it definitely doesn't make sense from an alliance management perspective. But that's kind of the point. There is no coherent strategy. It's all impulse. It's all reaction. And that's why Europe is panicking. Polls show European confidence in U.S. support is cratering. We're talking about decades of trust being eroded in months. And it's not just public opinion, it's official government positions. Countries are quietly starting to ask, what if we can't rely on America? What's plan B? And for an alliance built entirely on collective defense, that question is existential. Russia knows this, by the way. Putin's not stupid. He sees the chaos. He sees Trump attacking NATO members. He sees European allies questioning American commitment, and he's absolutely going to exploit it. Those drone incursions, those jets in Estonian airspace, that's testing. That's probing. Russia's figuring out how much they can get away with while NATO's distracted by internal drama. And here's the scary part. If Russia miscalculates, if they push too far thinking NATO won't respond because Trump's weakened the alliance, we could end up in a shooting war nobody wanted. That's how conflicts start. Not because someone planned it, but because deterrence failed and miscalculation led to escalation. So when NATO defense ministers meet in Brussels, they're trying to figure out how to prevent that, how to maintain deterrence, how to reassure Eastern European members that Article 5 still means something, how to manage the fact that their biggest ally is also their biggest problem right now. It's an impossible situation. And yeah, it's absolutely wild that we're even here. Let me give you some context on just how unprecedented this is. NATO has survived a lot. The Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, wars in the Balkans, the war on terror, internal disagreements over Iraq. But through all of that, there was never really doubt that America was committed. Even when European countries disagree with U.S. policy, and they did frequently, nobody questioned whether America would show up if Article 5 got triggered. Trump's changed that calculation. And it's not just rhetoric anymore. It's policy uncertainty. It's the threat of real consequences for allies. It's the suggestion that maybe America's commitment has conditions that weren't there before, and that's fundamentally destabilizing. Think about what this means for countries like the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. These are small countries that were under Soviet control until the 1990s. They joined NATO specifically because they wanted protection from Russia. They've been model members. They meet defense spending targets. They contribute to NATO missions. They host allied forces. They've done everything right. And now they're watching Trump threaten Spain, a much bigger, more powerful country. And they're thinking, if Spain's vulnerable to being kicked out, what about us? That's not hypothetical anxiety. That's a genuine security crisis for them. Because without NATO, without American backing, they have no real defense against Russian pressure. Poland's in a slightly better position because they're bigger and they've invested heavily in their military. But they're still on the front line. They're still dealing with Russian aggression. And they're still dependent on NATO, on America, for ultimate security. If they can't trust that commitment, they have to completely rethink their strategic position, maybe cut deals with Russia, maybe develop their own nuclear weapons. Those are the kind of desperate calculations countries make when they can't rely on allies anymore. And yeah, this is exactly what Putin wants. He doesn't have to invade anyone if NATO falls apart on its own. If Trump does the work for him by destroying alliance cohesion, Putin gets everything he wants without firing a shot. He gets a divided Europe. He gets weakened American influence. He gets room to maneuver in Eastern Europe without worrying about collective response. It's a geopolitical win handed to him on a silver platter. The Middle East angle makes this even more complicated. Trump's unilateral commitment to Qatar, that's not just random. Qatar hosts a major U.S. military base, but making that commitment without any congressional consultation, without any formal treaty process, while simultaneously questioning our oldest and most important alliance, that sends a message that American foreign policy is completely transactional and unpredictable. And that's poison for alliance management. Okay, so let's break this down into what actually matters.
But it is very unprecedented and also raises concerns about what is it that the United States knows and needs at this time that it's pulling so many generals from around the world and their posts.
Because there's a lot of noise here, but the core issues are pretty straightforward. Point one, Trump's rhetoric is directly weakening NATO at the worst possible time. Russia is more aggressive now than they've been in years. Drones in Poland and Romania, jets over Estonia. This is serious military activity that requires a united response. Instead, NATO's dealing with an internal crisis because Trump won't stop attacking member countries. That's not strategy, that's sabotage. Point 2. European allies genuinely don't trust U.S. commitment anymore. And look, this isn't just hurt feelings. These are countries that have built their entire defense strategies around NATO. They've invested in integration with U.S. forces. They've hosted American bases. They've contributed to missions. And now they're being told, maybe implicitly but clearly, that America might not actually show up when it counts. That's terrifying for them. Point 3. Russia is exploiting this chaos, and it's going to get worse. Putin sees division in NATO as an opportunity. Those drone incursions aren't random. They're deliberate tests of alliance resolve. And every time Trump questions NATO or threatens a member, Russia gets bolder. That's how deterrence collapses. That's how conflicts escalate. Point 4. The timing of this emergency meeting tells you everything. NATO doesn't call emergency sessions lightly. The fact that defense ministers are dropping everything to meet in Brussels right now means they see this as a genuine crisis. They're not just concerned, they're alarmed. And when your allies are more worried about you than about the adversary, something's fundamentally broken. So why does this matter beyond just foreign policy drama? Because NATO has been the foundation of global security since World War II. It's prevented major power conflicts in Europe. It's maintained stability. It's allowed democracy to flourish in countries that were previously under Soviet control. And if it falls apart, if it becomes ineffective because America's abandoned it, the consequences are massive. Think about what happens if NATO fails. Russia moves into the Baltics. Maybe not all at once, but gradually testing boundaries, creating frozen conflicts, destabilizing democracies. And without NATO, what stops them? European countries individually can't match Russian military power. They need collective defense. They need American backing. Take that away, and Eastern Europe becomes vulnerable in ways we haven't seen since the Cold War. But it's not just about Europe. NATO's credibility affects every U.S. alliance globally. If we won't honor our commitments to NATO, our oldest and most established alliance, why would Japan trust us? Why would South Korea? Why would Taiwan believe we'd defend them if China attacked? Why would any country believe American security guarantees mean anything? That credibility is priceless, and Trump's burning through it at an alarming rate. Now, let's talk about what Trump's defenders say. Because yeah, there's another side to this. They argue that NATO members need to spend more on defense, that the U.S. has been carrying too much of the burden, that European countries have been free riding on American military power while underfunding their own forces. And there's some truth to that. Many NATO countries weren't meeting the 2% of GDP defense spending target until recently. That's a legitimate complaint. The U.S. does spend more on defense than most NATO countries combined. We do provide the bulk of the alliance's military capability. And yeah, it's fair to ask European countries to step up their contributions. That's not unreasonable. The problem isn't the goal of getting allies to spend more. The problem is the method Trump's using. But here's the thing. You don't fix that problem by threatening to blow up the alliance. You fix it through diplomacy, through pressure. Sure, but measured pressure. Through working with allies to increase their contributions while maintaining the fundamental commitment to collective defense. Trump's approach, threatening explosion, questioning Article 5, that doesn't strengthen NATO. It destroys it. And the timing couldn't be worse. Because we're not in a period of peace where we can afford to mess around with alliance structures. We're in a period of increasing great power competition. Russia's aggressive. China's watching everything closely to see how we handle alliances. If they see us abandoning NATO, that tells them we might abandon Taiwan or South Korea or anyone else who depends on us. That's a signal we absolutely cannot afford to send. Here's what's going to happen next, and yeah, this is important. NATO's going to try to paper over these divisions. They'll issue statements reaffirming unity. They'll conduct joint exercises. They'll try to project strength. But underneath, the cracks are there. European countries are already quietly diversifying their security arrangements. France and Germany are talking about European strategic autonomy, basically building capability independent of the U.S. That's a direct response to Trump making them question American reliability. In the medium term, we could see NATO functionally split, Western European countries moving toward their own defense arrangements, Eastern European countries desperately trying to maintain U.S. presence because they're on Russia's border and can't afford to go it alone, and the U.S. split, well, under Trump, maybe withdrawing from commitments that have kept the peace for 75 years. That's not speculation. That's the logical endpoint of current trends. The 2026 midterms are going to be huge on this issue, by the way, because if voters care about national security, if they care about America's role in the world, Trump's NATO policy is going to be a major vulnerability. Democrats will hammer him on weakening alliances, on emboldening Russia, on making America less safe by destroying the credibility we've built over decades, and some Republicans might even join them because traditional GOP foreign policy was pro-NATO and pro-alliance. Trump's turned that upside down. But here's the frustrating part. A lot of voters don't pay attention to foreign policy until it directly affects them. They don't see NATO as relevant to their daily lives. So Trump might get away with this politically, even as he does massive damage strategically. That's the gamble he's taking, that Americans won't care enough about alliance management to hold him accountable. And maybe he's right. Maybe voters are so focused on domestic issues, inflation, immigration, culture wars, that they won't prioritize what's happening with NATO. But that doesn't change the strategic reality. It doesn't change the fact that America's position in the world is weakening, that our allies don't trust us, that our adversaries are emboldened. Those consequences are real whether voters care or not. Let's talk about the economic dimension too, because this isn't just military. NATO countries trade with each other. They invest in each other's economies. They cooperate on technology, on energy, on supply chains. Alliance relationships facilitate all of that. When you undermine the alliance, you undermine those economic relationships too. European companies are already nervous about investing in long-term projects that depend on U.S. partnership. If they can't trust that the political relationship will be stable, why would they commit billions to joint ventures? Why would they integrate their supply chains with American companies? Economic cooperation depends on political trust, and Trump's destroying that trust. And here's something most people miss. American military presence in Europe isn't charity. It serves U.S. interests. Those bases in Germany, in Italy, in the UK, we use them to project power globally. They're logistics hubs. They're forward operating positions. They give us reach into the Middle East, into Africa, into Eastern Europe. If we lose access to those bases because we've torched our alliances, American military capability takes a massive hit. So when Trump talks about allies not paying enough, he's missing the bigger picture. Yes, they should spend more on defense, but American military presence in Europe benefits America just as much as it benefits Europeans, maybe more. We're not doing them a favor. We're pursuing our own strategic interests, and Trump's approach threatens to undermine that. So what's the bottom line here? NATO's in crisis, not because of external threats, but because the American president is actively undermining it. European allies are terrified. Russia's emboldened, and the entire post-World War II security architecture that's kept major powers from fighting each other is at risk. That's what this emergency meeting is really about. That's what's at stake. And yeah, it matters. It matters because NATO has prevented wars. It matters because alliances are how America projects power globally. It matters because our credibility as a partner affects everything from trade deals to security commitments to our ability to lead on the world stage. Trump likes to say he's making America great again. But what's happening with NATO? That's making America weaker, more isolated, less trusted. And in a world where China and Russia are actively challenging American influence, we can't afford that. We need allies. We need partnerships. We need other countries to believe that when America makes a commitment, we keep it. Right now, they don't believe that. And that's the real emergency NATO's meeting about. Not Russian drones, not airspace violations, but whether the alliance can survive an American president who seems determined to destroy it. And if it can't, if NATO falls apart on Trump's watch, the world's going to be a much more dangerous place for everyone, including us. The irony here is brutal. Trump ran on making America strong, on restoring American power and prestige, on making sure nobody pushes us around. But his NATO policy is achieving the opposite. It's isolating us. It's weakening our position. It's giving our adversaries exactly what they want. Putin couldn't have designed a better strategy for undermining Western unity if he tried, and Trump's doing it for him. Look, I get the frustration with alliances. I get that it's annoying when other countries don't pull their weight. I get that Americans are tired of feeling like we're responsible for solving everyone else's problems. Those are legitimate feelings, but the solution isn't to burn everything down. The solution is smart, patient diplomacy that strengthens alliances while getting fair burden sharing. Trump doesn't do patient. He doesn't do nuance. He sees NATO as a protection racket where countries pay or they don't get defended, but that's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. And the fact that he doesn't understand that or doesn't care is exactly why we're in this crisis. So yeah, keep your eyes on Brussels, because what happens in that meeting room could determine whether the most successful military alliance in history survives the next few years, and that's going to shape everything that comes after. The power dynamics between the US and China, the security situation in Europe, the credibility of American commitments worldwide, all of it hinges on whether NATO can weather this storm. And honestly, it's not looking good. Trump's not backing down. He's doubling down. European leaders are running out of patience. Russia's getting more aggressive, and the center isn't holding. This emergency meeting might produce some temporary fixes, but the fundamental problem, American unreliability under Trump, that's not getting solved anytime soon. We're watching the potential collapse of the post-war order in real time, and it's not happening because of some external shock or massive war. It's happening because one guy in the White House decided alliances are for suckers. That's the reality. That's where we are. Stay tuned. This story is just getting started. And yeah, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.